we thought that this would be a really good way to engage even more deeply in some of the issues that our speakers have raised and also the questions that you've posed. So I'm going to pose a couple of questions and then we're handing it over to you. So Joanne and Steph, this is a question for you. What do you see as the key priority for the NDIS to implement to support the inclusion of people from health communities? What do you think are the key priorities for the agency?
That's not fair. So, I think that what Joe brought in that presentation is the passion. And when I talk to my staff and to the partners that we've employed, it is actually about this commitment to get it right. And so that means that we have to be available, we have to engage, we have to talk to organisations who already know. It's about building on what is already there rather than creating new stuff just for the sake of it. It's about respecting the roots that are already embedded in those communities and helping them grow and get stronger. We have to ask for a bit of faith, I think, in that I don't think we're going to get it right from day one at all. I can almost guarantee that. I hope that in the stories that you hear today, you will hear that it gets better. And for you to remind us of the need to get better and for us to be willing and capable to listen. We have many, many masters as we roll out the scheme. We have the massive expectations of individuals and their families of many, many years of unmet need and lack of understanding of that need. And we have governments who need to make sure that we do the bilateral agreements by the right time frames. And sometimes they rub. Sometimes we will find ourselves doing things faster and with less passion and with less detail than what we need going forward. But this is a lifelong relationship. It is a commitment that the scheme will be there forever. It will stop the hunting of who's going to help you. It will be the one single consistent story that you can get about reasonable and necessary supports for your disability-related needs. I think the other thing that I would ask us, that I want my agency to understand is we're not going to be able to solve the wrongs of society for so long in so many areas. And we are just a national disability insurance scheme. And we need to correct the gaps in support for people with disability, and we need to do that at the same time as understanding that complexity that you talk about, Joe. So time and commitment and faith, I think, are in between, if that helps.
I think I'd have three things. One is accountability and oversight. I think that's essential in terms of the NDIS, because as this is rolled out, I think we need to have a very clear view of who's getting what, for what reasons, and in what way. And I think the NDIS is the body to take that responsibility on, obviously with Alistair. The second thing I would say is that really you need to have some, accountability and oversight would be one. The second thing would be metrics, and I'm not a particularly metric person, but I think metrics are essential here. That we have some understanding of what the outcome measures are, the utilisation measures and the access measures, and I know you're already working on that. And I say that not to critique the NDIS, because as I said, health doesn't do it well. Aged care doesn't do it well. I actually see this as an opportunity for the NDIS to do the work that nobody else has been able to do. which is, you know, what are the appropriate outcomes for different groups. I think that's an amazing piece of work. And the third one, I think, for the NDIS and for everybody is, it is very easy to get trapped within the majority groups, within the minority groups. So listening to the voices that are already well established, and I would say that this is a unique time to be able to listen to a range of different voices in the communities. And the last thing I'd say, which is adding to that, is to say, if you see a checklist on any community, burn it immediately. Tear it up, throw it out, because whatever it says will be right and it will be wrong. And so that thing about simplistic representations of what cultural competence is, simplistic representations of culture, I know the NDIS is avoiding this, but it is one of the greatest risks in this area as more funding comes in, that people present themselves as experts and they present the communities in particular ways. And for me, the most vulnerable groups in the communities are the ones who most miss out on, because, you know, if you've got the checklist, then it's fine. It's not fine. That's not how we need to relate to people.
Just on the outcomes, can I just very quickly jump onto our website and you will see the first pilot study of the outcome measures. It's fascinating because it confirms everything that we've all just talked about around the extent to which people with a disability are, for example, prevented from doing the things that they wanted to do because of their disability. The extent to which they believe that they had been subject to some form of discrimination within the period of time. But importantly, it also gives you a measure about how different the NDIS has made their life. So when you come into the scheme, we'll ask you to answer these questions about outcome measures, and then on a regular basis, we'll ask you for your views about how those things have changed. And it becomes a really powerful story. 46%, picking up the lady who spoke to nobody, 46% of people with a disability have nobody else in their life that they can call in the event of an emergency other than a funded service provider. So things like that, they're really now very, very powerful messages that are not from the ABS SDAC data, but real people and heaps of people.
Alistair, did you want to add anything to that?
Just one quick point, I think, just following up on what Joe was talking about earlier, and that was the silos and the approach there. And look, I absolutely agree that's an issue and it's a definite barrier. And hopefully the NDIS or philosophy can actually start to link in, influence government and maybe break down those silos. I think that there is potential for influence, to influence government and to influence those silos, to pull them down, and looking at a person-centred approach will also be a benefit. But I think that the risks, I don't want to see the government provide funding and then see other organisations perhaps being neglected. So I think the funding needs to be appropriate and correct.
Thank you. Can I just say one more thing? Sorry, one other thing. The other thing that I think I would really like to focus on is this concept of co-production that a couple of people have spoken about. And you'll see, I touched on our commitment about a community by community approach. How do we not only make sure that we give the access in a way that respects the needs of each community, but how do we then design the services to meet the needs of those communities? I have to run at lunchtime today, so I'm off to another meeting about how do we co-design the implementation of the scheme in East Arnhem, on top of the Northern Territory. So not only about access, not only about the services, but how do we create services where none exist and that respond to what the community needs. And there's no reason why we couldn't do that at a community by community basis.
Good. Look, I'm going
If I could, sorry, apologies, would just like to add something quickly. Talking about access, particularly in outcomes, what Joe was talking about previously, access and then outcomes. For example, I think you can have a confusion between the two. You've got access, so we have interpreters here today, which is great. However, what is the outcome? I would really like the highest quality interpreter, but hearing people often would not know. They see the interpreter there, and they think, great. Hearing people really don't have a clue in relation to the qualification or expertise. So the outcome, I think, is the question, and that's probably a good example. I think that's particularly important, and as the program develops, I'm sure that when you think about access, that's a part of it, but certainly outcome will become an important element.
Thank you. And you might have to give us feedback, Alistair, on the quality of our interpreters. Okay. Oh, Maureen, go for it.
Just as a question for anyone on the panel, really. Given Stephanie, what you said about the percentage, the high percentage of people who have no one in their lives and only service providers, what are your thoughts about the need to increase access to independent advocacy, and do you think enough attention is being given to the need for access to independent advocacy?
So I'll answer in a very bureaucratic way. The Department of Social Services looks after the National Disability Advocacy Program, and that is being reformed and implemented as part of the scheme, or to contribute to the scheme. The scheme has its own advocacy support for reviews. So where a person is unhappy about the outcomes, but there are advocates supported to assist in that process. But one of our other key focus is to build self-advocacy. Maureen will well know the little group in Victoria called the Self-Advocacy Resource Unit, and people like CREW, where they build the skills for an individual to advocate on their own behalf. Our whole focus through the scheme will be to gradually build up those skill bases. In the meantime, absolutely, advocacy remains a very, very important one. Anyone else want to respond to that?
Just from another perspective, but completely interrelated, I did a study of 195 health professionals across New South Wales and asked them who was at risk in the healthcare system, so who was the most vulnerable. And the number one answer was people without an advocate. And that in the healthcare system, at risk of the healthcare system. So for me, that need for advocacy, and it can take multiple forms, is absolutely fundamental.
I think I come from an advocacy background myself, and I know the value and worth and the absolute importance of having that kind of scenario system and developing competence and awareness in relation to that, the experience and relationships that have developed. I think it's just fundamentally important that advocacy continues to be an ongoing role and responsibility of the NDIS.
Thank you.
I don't need the microphone from there, thank you, I need to sign. So hi everyone. It's really a pleasure to hear all the things that the panel is saying and the speakers previously saying, and I am a champion, an NDIS champion myself, appointed by the federal government. So I work with many different organisations, many of the multicultural organisations. But within Australia, I see that there is a disadvantage for people who have a disability, specifically those who are from a culturally or linguistically diverse background. Other countries, such as the US and the UK, are very much in advance of what we are doing. They have many support groups, and those people who have a disability become the advocates within those support groups, and they are supported very well with note takers, with people who can translate or interpret for them. But we don't have so many of those types of supports here. There are many people who come from overseas who are deaf and see that the comparison between what is supported here and what is not supported is very different from their overseas experience. they often can't find the services that they are able to get. And unfortunately, within Australia, some of the services don't include being able to access language for people who are deaf who come from overseas. There are many, many services for other types of disabilities, particularly for those people who come from overseas, if they have physical impairments or if they are blind, but unfortunately there are not enough services for people who are from poor backgrounds, including those people who are deaf. We consider ourselves a linguistic minority as well. So there needs to be services that are specifically designed for deaf people and who have those types of services that we're able to be provided for them. What are your thoughts on that situation?
Perhaps Alistair?
Wow. Okay, I think what you've raised is particularly significant. Really, I think Australia compared to the world is only a very small nation. I think that perhaps could be part of the problem. The resources are just not available as they are in other countries. You talked about America. I think we have, 300 million population in Australia. We have, 23, 24 million. So unfortunately, yes, we are behind, but I think it's a resource issue. I also think we're behind in relation, because of advocacy, to actually fight to succeed in specific areas. And to be honest, I think that most of the problem really comes from the numbers. We just don't have the numbers. However, certainly we're on the same wavelength. I think that there are certain barriers there that we need to look at and can overcome.
Thank you. Now we're up over time. Kevin, did you have a quick question or a long question? It's a quick comment. Okay. Kevin Cox. Has he ever been quick in his comments?
Well, that depends on the quality of the outcome. I just wanted to pick up on the notion of self-advocacy. I think that it's only been used in the context of disability. And when we look at it in other contexts, it's called self-assertiveness. It's being empowered to understand your rights and how you do those in your daily duties or as you carry out your daily functions as a citizen. I've seen, but I have seen people with disabilities who have been trained as self-advocates and quickly end up not understanding the context and understanding the power imbalances that they're directly in. And I've seen them within 1 minute and 28 seconds on a train and then being arrested for assault and on a pathway to a criminal justice system. I think we have to be very careful in this. It's very easy and avoidance of a notion to say that everyone can be a self-advocate, because we all have our nemesis, and particularly when in the health system, even doctors are not good advocates for themselves, because the health system is one of the most powerful systems we experience. So structurally, I think you have to think very carefully about seeing self-advocacy as the panacea to empowering people to negotiate their way through a very biased, powerful, self-vested structural system of the service provision that we face in this country.
Well, thank you. Over time, and everybody has to get to their cup of tea and coffee. So can you join with me in thanking our three wonderful opening speakers?